Okay, Sean here at Grim Parts Co. And today we're going to do Timken wheel bearing in-play setup. It applies to all wheels from 1970 to 1999. And what we're going to do is replace the bearings. I'll show you how to install the bearings and then actually set the in-play. And repack your bearings, put fresh seals in, and get the wheel on the bike. Okay, so to do this job, you're gonna need a set of wheel seals, wheel bearings, a hammer, your bearing packer, your race remover with the driver, a breaker bar with the right socket for your axle. Either your axle or I made this axle for doing the job, making it a little easier. A set of race and seal drivers, some wheel shim, a torque wrench. I use the magnet to help get some of the shims out when you're setting it up on the vise, something to measure your shims with, a seal puller, some lube, a grease gun, and a heavy hammer. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna wanna do is get your old wheel bearings out. This particular wheel I've already inspected. It actually had one good wheel bearing and one bad one. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace them both and we'll just start fresh. So I use my seal puller, go ahead and get in here and carefully dig out your seal. Behind your seal is gonna be your Timken bearing. Okay, on one side, and then I've already pulled the tube out, but there's a tube on the inside, and there should be a set of washers and a top hat spacer, and this is what we're actually going to adjust to set the in play. So once you get both of the bearings out, go ahead and clean everything up, and we'll move on to getting the races out of the wheel. Fuck. All right. Okay, so we'll take our Timken bearing race remover tool. It's a two-part deal. Set it in there, and it's got these little notches, and they'll slip into the wheel, and you want to separate them. And then we have our driver, and the best way to do this is hold this, flip the wheel on the side, and stick the driver into the back side so that it locks into this hole, and then we'll set this down on our 2x4. Grab your installer, slip it in from the opposite side until it's seated in here like this, and then you're going to carefully set your wheel down in between here, so you got this lip and this lip on the 2x4 so that when we pound this race out, it can fall down the center here. I don't know that I mentioned you needed a big hammer before, but you need a big hammer. When you hear that, you know you come out the other side, you can go ahead and pull her out this way, just the tip. Check to ensure that, yes, in fact, you do have your race out. We'll go ahead and install the other side, flip everything around, and do it all over again. When you buy your bearings, they come in a package. Your bearings are matched up to the race. I like to keep the races with the bearings. So what I usually do is, this is my sprocket side, the other side obviously your disc side. So just on the rag where you're working, I'll put an S on here for sprocket and the other side for disc. And then that way, when you take these out of the package, you can kind of keep your bearings matched up with the races. Your race, the taper, the small part goes in and the big part goes out. Don't put them in back asswards. It's something you can do. Don't do it. Then you take your race installer, should fit over like so. This has already got some lube on it. It's always a good idea to have a little bit of lube. Just the tip has some factory lube from here. Just square this up and drive this home. You can use a press. I typically just do it this way. Depends on the wheel sometimes. And then we say drive it home. That's all the way to the bottom, and you can always typically hear the sound difference from when you're hammering. It'll change from sort of a hollow sound to kind of a dead thud, and that's when you know you're home. Always stop and check and make sure you're going in straight. You can kind of gauge that by looking around your race installer and see, you know, if you're off a little bit, make sure you square it up. You want it to go in straight. And there you can hear the difference there. A lot of times there'll be a little bit of fragments in there. I like to clean that stuff up. Then we'll just flip it around, install the other race. I like to use a vise, and I actually made up this axle because I do a lot of these. You can use your stock axle for this procedure, and then I take a couple extra spacers and set it up off so the wheel's not in jeopardy of getting damaged on the vise. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to take your unlubed dry bearing, set it with the taper up, and then we're going to set the wheel on there, set the wheel spacer, and I like to use the shims that came out of the wheel and go ahead and start there to see if we can get a baseline measurement, see where we're at, and then make adjustments from there. And take our axle tube. The reason why we do it dry is because the grease will give you an inaccurate measurement, and if you do it that way, you may be too fat or too tight and you won't know it. So we'll set it up. The in-place spec on these wheels is 1 to 5 thousandths. I like to be about 3 if possible, and so we'll adjust it to try to hit that number. And then after your in-play is set and you know where you're at, then you can lube your bearings and put everything together. These are your adjustment spacers. The top hat rides on your bearing. This is your disc side bearing, and you can see here that this matches the race there. You want it to fit like that. If you run it this way, you're going to be putting pressure on the outside of the race and it's not going to work correctly. It'll burn the bearing up. So that top hat spacer goes like this. Your shims always go inside first, and then because some of these are like 2 thou thick, they're super thin. So if I've got a thicker spacer like this, I like to go thick spacer, thin spacer, and then your top hat spacer, and that'll protect that thin spacer from breaking up. And then you just set that in like this, and it'll drop down in there, and then you set your bearing over the top. I don't like that's not enough because we're doing 55 foot-pounds, so I don't want to do that. Take and do this like this. Sometimes you gotta get the right combo, you know? So we're back, folks. No, check it out. What we're gonna do here is torque this. Is the rear wheel. Torque spec is 50 to 55 foot-pounds. I always go to 55 when I'm doing this. We'll click. Then we're going to set up our dial indicator. It's nice to be able to use a disc. I'm going to try to set it up as perpendicular to the axle as possible. Okay, so once you got your dial indicator set up, just pull up and down a couple times, check your measurement. You can see that we're about 4 thou on there. Okay, so at this point, we know we've got 4 thousandths, and we did that with dry bearings. So we're going to take everything apart. I put the bearings back on my little cloth over here that I've marked, and then we will pack the bearings with grease, and then we'll go through the assembly process of the wheel, and then we're good to go. Just a quick note about the shims. Like I said, I have a kit, and they come in 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32 thousandths. This particular one has got a 32 and an 8. We'll have this kit on our website if you wanted to pick it up, or this is something you can get from individually from like a local custom bike shop would have these, and it's definitely something you're gonna need, so something to consider before you get started on this project. It's a messy job. I'm really not a big fan, but it's got to be done. So I have this fancy packer. You can get these at or our website. Basically just set your bearing on over here. You could do this by hand. I guess I could show you how to pack a bearing by hand. Really don't want to because then I get super greasy, but then you take your grease gun, pump this thing full of grease, little pumperino. You see the grease coming out? Once you get that grease, go ahead and grease up your other bearing. We're gonna start from the pulley side. I like to take and put the top hat spacer on the pulley side. So we'll go ahead and set up the disc side here real quickly. This is actually Worth grease. I use SIG 2000. Super sticky. Very good stuff. One of the things I do too is I pack the race. I just get a little, put some grease around there, gives a spot for the bearing to sit in there. I take and coat. So you see that the grease gun packer pushes the grease through both sides of the race. And then I coat the outside edge. I've already packed the race itself with grease, right? So then we'll set that nightmare in there. And then I'll take and go another step further and put another stick of grease around there. I like to be super thorough in the grease department. Just the tip. Take your seal, So then just take on this side, I just run it flush. If you use your factory manual, there's actually a depth setting for these. On this side it's flush and the other side's like 200 thou below the lip. You can double check that measurement in your manual. Now we're on the other side. Drop your spacer in. Okay, set 3. Like I was saying, put your thinnest one in between, sandwich it in between the two thick ones. Then drop that in with your top hat facing up. Okay? Just put a little butter, grease butter around here. Like that. This is one of those deals you really can't ever have too much grease. You see this stuff is super stringy and sticky. It clings to everything. Okay, go ahead and set your bearing in. There. Now there's plenty of grease in there. I'm not going to add any more on this one. Grab your new seal. I will peel a little grease off though. A little smear of seal on grease on the inside there. Then get ready to drop this guy in its hole. On this one, I drop it a little below the lip. Like I was saying, it's about 200 thou. Go a little bit lower than that. The bearing sits low in there, and so that's kind of what that's for. But that's close enough. Okay, at this point, you're going to want to kind of clean everything up, then get ready to reinstall your wheel.
I wanna love you till the end.